Hello traders, this is Frank Paul from Forex Mentor speaking with you on Saturday, April 2nd, 2016. Welcome to this latest complimentary weekend video presentation. You haven't heard from me for a while on Saturdays in the usual slot because I was on vacation with my family for a couple of weeks somewhere special and decided to just stay away from computers and the markets and trading and focus on having some relaxation time, which was very, very beneficial. But I'm back at it now, so I'd like to get back into the swing of things with these weekend videos as well. And to do so here, we're going to address subjects of relevance to a product we call Trendline Mastery, which is actually two products, and I'll get to that in just a minute. Focused on how to use the powerful tools and applications of top-down trendline analysis for trading success. That's what it's all about. It's not about indicators, although paradoxically an indicator is exactly what I'm going to be focusing on today, and I'll clarify in just a minute. But it's really all about finding a trend with trendline analysis. That's our starting point. And today's video is going to show you a really cool and very unique application of that can actually take place on an indicator panel. So our message for today is simple. Trendline analysis is versatile, so much so in fact that you can even apply it with great results on one particular stock indicator, the RSI or Relative Strength Index indicator. It alone and amongst all widely available indicators, and that would include stochastics, MACD, CCI, what have you, it alone is particularly amenable to trendline analysis, in my opinion, because it does something that more directly reflects the price panel. In fact, if you were to put a line plot of price action on the close on your price panel and compare it to the display output of RSI, you'd see there's some very strong similarities there. But because RSI is on an index where price is not, it allows us to see support, resistance, and trendline relationships that are not immediately apparent on the price panel, at least from time to time. And today's chart example is going to demonstrate that. So it allows us to see trends and trend lines and support resistance events in ways which we might otherwise miss. And that is a very powerful, useful application of RSI. This is an idea that I've been coming back to time and time again, been playing with it for a very long period of time. I have seen people in other presentations show how to draw trend lines on RSI. I have never seen anybody do it in a kind of top-down fashion, as I'm going to quickly introduce to you with the pound-yen pair on price action from Friday of this past week. So we're going to do two things here. We're going to show you how top-down trend analysis can be realized with trend lines drawn on the RSI panel. We're going to show you how a trend line break, specifically a break of a corrective trend line on the RSI panel, can really help you fine-tune your entry triggers. Now I'm going to be covering off topics here that deserve a lot of extra attention and background information. If I were to try and explain this fully from the very beginning, it would end up being a 1 or 2 hour long presentation, which obviously we'll want to avoid. I want to be respectful of your time limitations, so we're going to try and make this concise enough and short enough to give you some really useful food for thought, but not to oversaddle this with a lot of theory. That said, our Trendline Mastery Traders Club monthly blog post for April will cover this subject in greater detail. That will be posted later in the month, and I'll give you details on how to access that article before the end of this presentation. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to draw trend lines, not on the price panel, as is usually the case, and which is featured extensively throughout the Trendline Mastery Foundation course and also the Trendline Mastery Traders Club regular updates, but on something altogether different, and that's just once again demonstrating the versatility of trendline analysis. Today's chart example is pound yen with a short bias during the London session for Friday, April 1st, 2016. Now I'm going to do two things here. I'm going to first show you how a confluence of likewise trendline readings on the RSI panel on various time frames conveyed the essence of a strong trend. It has always been my personal specialty to trade with the trend And I have defined that furthermore by way of looking for the same trending metrics across multiple time frames simultaneously. That's characterized pretty much everything I've done with Forex Mentor, at least over the past 4 to 5 years. And that's really how I do two things: trade with the trend and also reflect the principle of top-down analysis. I think that's very important. It's long been my contention, and I stick with it to the present day, that if you find a trend reading only on one time frame in isolation and you don't relate it to a broader trend on a higher time frame, there's no possible way other than by way of luck that you can consistently count on that single time frame analysis to guide you through a successful trade. Because what might look like a trend on the 15-minute chart may be nothing more than a corrective blip in a downtrend on, let's say, a 4-hour or daily chart. So the top-down perspective is important, and we're going to quickly reference that here with this chart example. But another thing that really demonstrates a uniqueness of trendline analysis on RSI is that it can do things that the price-based analysis alone might not be able to, sometimes at least. I don't want to suggest for a second that there's any inherent flaw with doing trendline analysis on the price panel. This is just something extra, though, that we can do, which can be helpful. So when we look at the 15-minute chart for pound yen, Friday, April 1st, a trendline break on the price panel as of the close for 7:30 a.m. GMT actually ended up being a false breakout, and price snapped back briefly. So if you had used that as an entry trigger, you would have had to use a fairly wide stop placed beyond the last high, and if you're doing so, that would have been okay because price later on did regroup and head lower as expected. But if you were using a very tight stop, unfortunately, you would have been stopped out. Okay, that's just something that happens from time to time. The markets often convey a trend, but they also, unfortunately, convey noise on a short-term basis, which can be harmful if you're just getting into the trade at that point. So there was a false trendline break on the price panel. However, the really cool thing about RSI here is that if we had done simultaneous trendline analysis at that point in time, we would have seen that the so-called trendline break on the price panel at 7:30 did not culminate in a trendline break on the RSI panel at the same time. Okay, that trend line remained intact on RSI as it appeared to break one on the price panel. And the idea being here is that you would defer to a proper trendline break on the RSI panel to help fine-tune your entry trigger. And that did not happen until later, as of the open for 9 a.m. GMT. So we'll really see this in spades when we finally work our way down to the 15-minute chart. But what I'd like to do to begin with is show you the top-down context for a downtrend reading using trendline analysis on the RSI panel. So the indicator panel at bottom here is obviously RSI, or the relative strength index. And I won't get into the technique of how to draw trend lines on RSI other than by way of a real brief introduction, which is to say that you use swings or peaks that are obvious, which would be on the price panel typically compatible with swing point patterns. You want to see on RSI a little bit of a peak, and then price comes down and then makes another peak. Okay, so on the RSI plot itself, you're looking to connect those lower highs in a downtrend, and if we were in an uptrend, it would be connecting higher lows, obviously. Okay, so I've got a couple different ones, but to avoid confusing the situation here, I thought I would just stick with this one. So on the monthly chart, we have a peak on the RSI panel July 2015, another one here November 2015. Now you have to do your very best to be as nitpicky precise as you can in lining up those peaks so that you get the proper and accurate slope of the trend line. But what this shows you, as long as price is remaining below this trend line here on the RSI panel, we can say that there's a downtrend on the monthly. Now the analog to that is just simply trendline analysis on the price panel itself. And it's a really good idea to do both at the same time. You look for a trendline on RSI, you look to see what is applying on the price panel at the same time, and they should be compatible most of the time. And if there's any disagreement, then maybe it's not an accurate signal. You would be ideally looking for agreement between these two things. Okay, but on the monthly chart here, on pound yen into Friday, April 1st, we had a downtrend reading on the RSI panel connecting one high to the next lower high, and until and unless price breaks up and through that trend line, that trend reading remains intact. Okay, so we're just going to basically go through here and see iterations of pretty much the same thing on these different time frames. Again, I want to be really as precise as I can, capturing the peaks. So again, this analysis wouldn't have been consistent all the way through, but certainly by the time we get to the current week, just ending, the week of March 28th, okay, there was no deviation from this trendline analysis, where I'm capturing a peak for the week of June 22nd, 2015, to here, November 30th, which just happens to perfectly capture this peak right here, March 7th, which in turn helps us identify resistance on the price panel itself, right here. Now, you might have spotted an old low in the background right here and drawn a horizontal line across, so that when we come to the high for the week of March 7th, we see price butting up against a horizontal line. But isn't it really cool that at the same time we can see price butting up a diagonal trend line on RSI itself, just helping to confirm some kind of a resistance event happening here. And this just demonstrates once again the slightly different way that RSI captures price action itself. It's not a simple repeat of a line plot of the close, although from time to time, if you were to apply that, it would look very similar. In any event, we've got a resistance trend line on the RSI panel on the weekly chart, and that agrees with the monthly chart. And the idea here is that the best, strongest, clearest trending markets are the ones where we have that repetitive implication across multiple time frames, top down. And we can see that here too on the daily chart. And I'm just drawing in a dash vertical to show you the Friday session, the Friday daily bar. And before we got to the down close for the day, which was really nice, we had this resistance line. So I'm capturing the high for February 1st to the lower high for March 11th. Isn't it interesting that that's exactly as far as RSI went on March 29th, which just so happened to accurately capture a corrective top here on the price panel on that very same day. But since then, and into Friday's session, we can see RSI now is generally trending down after having corrected upwards and hitting this trend line as resistance. Really cool stuff. Very exciting. Just and lends a whole new way of looking at support, resistance, and trend that you might not necessarily capture, or at least with as much confidence, if looking only at the price panel itself and or other indicators by themselves, which you cannot do trendline analysis on. For example, I would not for a second suggest that you try to do this on a MACD panel. It's just not going to work. MACD is not amenable to this style of analysis at all. I would even say that much for stochastics. There are very few indicators that line up so well for trendline analysis this way as RSI does. We'll drill down further. What do we see on the 4-hour chart? Now I'm drawing a vertical through midnight GMT, so this is the first 4-hour bar for Friday. Again, we're not making this up after the fact. By the time you get to here, we have a peak here and a peak here, and all you had to do was see that relationship, one high to a lower high, connect them, and this gives you a resistance trend line by the time we get to the open of this bar here. Okay, it just gives you a clearer picture, whereas price is really quite choppy. If you're looking just at the price panel, it looks quite choppy, but RSI is taking the chop out and it's saying, no, there's a really strong trend here. So now we've got 4 different time frames, monthly, weekly, daily, 4-hour, giving us trendline analysis on the RSI panel, which is consistent. Again, we'll be exploring this in greater detail in the Trendline Mastery Traders Club monthly blog for April. We come down to the hourly chart, and this was really cool because I was able to see a trend line here. Let me just tidy this up a little bit, which was in the opposite direction. So I'm capturing this low here. This is 4 a.m. GMT March 31st, this higher low here. So rising lows is obviously indicative of support, which is generally bullish as an uptrend. But because that's running contrary to the prevailing trend on the higher time frames, we have to read that as a retracement or as corrective. Now, let's be honest, when we're looking at the price panel right here, is it dead obvious that if we just push this to the far right hand side, does it look like any time now price is going to fall off a cliff just based on the price panel? I don't know, maybe you can see it, I don't, but this looks like a lot of just sort of sideways, choppy, nondescript sort of price action here. But again, the value of trendline analysis on RSI is it's giving us greater clarity. And you can see to the far right hand side of the chart, and this would be the hourly bar for 11 p.m. GMT Thursday, we have a beautiful crystal clear trendline break on RSI itself that looks like that, which says that as of this open here, you're good to go short because price is breaking, RSI is breaking a corrective trend line on the hourly chart, which ran contrary to the higher level trend intact on all of the 4-hour and higher time frames. So that alone is a pretty good entry trigger, and as it turns out, boy, that's pretty close to the top of the market. Very well timed, no drawdown to speak of, no stop trigger, a good entry point into the short trade right at midnight GMT. Now later on there's a retracement. So if you missed that first opportunity, we're going to look for the same sort of thing as we drill down further here to the 15-minute chart. Once again, look at this. This is kind of a consolidation channel here. And to be perfectly honest with you, I don't know that I would have been looking to do trendline analysis on the price panel. If I had, it would have initially looked like this. And if you were operating just on the price panel alone, you would have seen that this bar here, well actually the preceding bar, but if that's not quite crystal clear enough for you, this bar here, 745, opens and closes below this trend line. So technically that's a trend line break, again of a counter trend support line when the higher level trend is down, in which case you might have looked to go short somewhere on or after the open of this bar, 8 a.m. Unfortunately, that would have resulted in a really big drawdown. In at 160.91, the highest high on that bar was 161.32, so that's more than 40 pips, not even including dealing spread. Now, if you used a natural stop, putting it 5 pips above the preceding high, you would have been okay, but that's a really wide stop, which means big risk, and you would have had to really substantially reduce your position sizing if your default is usually a tight stop of, let's say, 15 or 20 pips. Okay, so unfortunately, price gave us a false trendline break here. But if you look really closely at the RSI panel just below, there is a low and there's a higher low, which can be drawn any time from about 5:30 a.m. onwards. In other words, we have to see the swing to connect it. So you wouldn't have drawn that trend line before about here. But going forward from there, as I move this vertical line, you can see that that trend line was intact. Look what happens here. Okay, if we're waiting patiently for RSI to break the trend line on a close, not just on live price action, but on a close, that did not happen. Price broke a trend line. On the price panel itself, a trend line was broken. But RSI said, nope, I don't think so. This support line is still intact. And that was exactly correct, because just as price came down here, came down to this trend line on RSI, it touched it, then bounced off once again. A little bit of a head fake here. But look what happens if we wait patiently for the trendline break on the RSI panel itself, which happens where I've drawn this dashed vertical line on the far right hand side. Okay. In fact, it happens on the preceding bar, 8:45 a.m. But when we get to the open for 9 a.m., we have, per the second arrow, well, let me just get rid of this. I was going to say the second circle. This circled portion here shows you that on the preceding bar we had RSI actually breaking this trend line finally. So if using that as your entry trigger, well, guess what? This time there was no substantial drawdown and not much risk, and in fact a really good entry point into a good short trade. So the point here is that RSI breaks its own counter trend demand trend line for an effective short entry trigger on the 15-minute chart. And even despite the fact that we had non-farm payrolls coming out later that day, which is potentially very volatility inducing, before that event it was possible to get risk out of the trade. Okay, so this is really cool. I really like RSI. Without trendline analysis on it, quite honestly, I don't know that I do like it. Other than it gives us these generic sort of oversold readings when you see RSI coming below 30. If we saw it punching above 70, that's the so-called overbought. That can be helpful, and it also provides divergence signals from time to time if you're into that. But I have to say, having come back to this idea and played with it extensively over a long period of time, I think I like it best for trendline analysis like this, for support resistance, for trendline breaks as entry triggers, and especially in a top-down fashion, as I've tried to briefly introduce to you here. And again, we'll be covering that off in our monthly blog article for April. Okay, so if that's of interest to you, please be sure to check it out. I would just suggest, if you want to find out further about Trendline Mastery, please visit our public information pages. We have 2 of them. In fact, we have 2 public pages and 2 membership sites. Because for Trendline Mastery, we have both a course, our foundation course, which was co-presented with me by Peter Bain. And you can find out about the Trendline Mastery course at www.forexmentor.com/trendline. We also have a membership service, which obviously is very compatible with the course. It's based on it, in fact. That's called the Trendline Mastery Traders Club, which you can find out via the URL at bottom here, www.forexmentor.com/trendline/club.php. Now, when you go to that site, or that page, the members homepage looks like this, and I just wanted to briefly show you the range of resources here. We have a recap section, a forecast section, a hot pick section, live resources. So the recap is, as the name suggests, a twice weekly narrated video presentation which walks through all aspects of a recent winning trade that fundamentally reflected the application of top-down trendline analysis tools and techniques as explained in the Trendline Mastery course. So as I'm recording this, this is a fresh calendar page for April. Next week you would click the date picker for either Tuesday or Thursday to access the latest video at that point in time. So that's a really handy educational supplement. We also have our forecast section. And I can't open the latest one here because, again, we're on to a new calendar date picker. But again, on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we publish a multi-page PDF report which identifies all pairs from among a screening portfolio of 20, which satisfies the parameters of a strongly trending market based on compatible concurrent trendline analysis on all of the monthly, weekly, daily 4-hour charts. That's not the only way to define a trend, but it's one that I like. And we reflect that in our PDF report. And the purpose of this document is to bring to your attention, as a kind of a market screening tool, pairs that we think are worthy of closer attention for potential trend trade opportunities. Supplementing the PDF report, we have a Hot Picks video section where we take a closer look at one of the pairs listed in the latest forecast pack PDF report, and we provide also a narrated video review giving you a more intensive top-down analysis and some ideas for what to look for next on an anticipated trade on that pair. Every Wednesday we also do our Trendline Mastery live session, which is a members-only webinar platform. And it consists of 3 parts usually. Firstly, an open Q&A session where our members can ask any questions that are of relevance to them, and we answer them. Also, a live chart review and a trendline application review where we take one of the ideas presented in the foundation course and explore it more fully. Finally, we come to the resources section here, which includes several things. For the blog, you would click this first link at top here, Trendline Mastery Club blog, weekly member submission. We haven't had a lot of those, but if you do have questions you'd like to put forward by way of email, we're more than happy to work up a presentation referencing charts, etc. to answer your questions. Our Trendline Mastery Club forum, which thus far has not been too active. I'd really like to encourage some greater interaction there. For the weekly Trendline Mastery live sessions, you just click this link to get the archived versions, and finally our public webinars are available through the link at bottom here. But the blog is on the first link. You just click it and that takes you to the relevant blog page, and you can see we have a number of articles already posted to that section. The first for January was entitled What Trendlines Mean and How They Work. The second for February was titled Detailed Anatomy of a Top-Down Trendline-Based Trade. The third for March, A Simple Indicator Configuration to Confirm a Tradable Trend. And as I've already mentioned, the article coming in April will talk about how to apply trendline analysis on the RSI indicator as a really cool supplementary form of top-down trendline analysis, both for finding the trend itself and for finding entry triggers, as well as support resistance and some other really cool techniques that apply here. So that's coming your way in April, and I hope that you'll be able to join us. Please do be sure to check out our public information pages. If trendline analysis is something that you know you need to get better at and understand better, and I would suggest that it is one of the most basic and necessary aspects of a proper technical analysis approach, I think we might be able to help you. If you have any questions on any of this, please feel free to reach me anytime via email at frank@forexmentor.com. Thanks for joining us here. Have a great weekend, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the near future. Bye for now.